I was super scared to go to Detroit because like everything I heard was like it's one of the most violent cities and things like that. And, like I knew if I was Spanish speaking, I was probably going to spend most of my time in like the inner city and things like that. So I remember just being super scared, but trying to like hide it too because I don't know, you're not supposed to be maybe scared of those things. But I was really glad that I had a trainer who was like big and buff, and he was out there for a while. Elder Gardner, he'll laugh because I said that. But it was it was nice, and he was just totally comfortable with everything. And so the first day we went out there, we just emailed our families. But I can't. Well, actually, okay. My first week out there, it's kind of a joke, and I don't know if I should tell this story because it might like scare people, but. Like I just had some really weird experiences. We were doing personal study, and we got a call from our branch president, and he said, "Hey, this member in the ward, her brother died or whatever. Can you go over and like comfort her?" And so we said, "Yeah, like right now." And he's like, "Yeah, right now." And so we went over, and like the ambulance was still in front of the house, and so we went inside, and he was like. He had just died, and he was like still like in the house and everything, and like she asked us to bless him and things like that. So that was really weird. And then we like said like a prayer with like the paramedics and the police and everyone who was there. We just like all held hands in a circle and said a prayer and things like that. So it was just like really different. And then we went back home, and we started with companionship study, and then we had a recent convert call us and say, "Elders, I'm outside. I have someone for you to meet." So we're like, okay. And so we went downstairs and went outside, and this member had seen this like Mexican man get jumped and get his bike stolen, and he was like all beaten up and like a kind of black eye and bashed up knee and things like that, and she was like, "Help him." And we were just like, "Well, we don't know what to do," like, and so we just like advised her to like just to like take him home and like give him some food and just like maybe give him a little money or something. But we didn't really know what to do to help. But then when we were walking back to the apartment, this was like my third or fourth day out there. I just like was like, "Elder Gardner, is every week like this?" And he was just busting up laughing because yeah, we had like crazy times, but that morning was just like packed with crazy things, and so it was just kind of a shock, you know. I was like, okay, this is just very different world, and people just ask a lot for missionaries, which was really cool. So anyone who tries to describe Michigan, like where they're at, they always use the glove analogy. Like Michigan is like a glove. Let's see here. If I look at the camera, it's probably this way, I hope. So like Detroit is kind of like the thumb. And so our mission really kind of only covered this area. The Lansing mission covers pretty much the rest of Michigan. And so Detroit, it goes up to Flint and down to like the border of Ohio, around there. But I was never in those areas because I was Spanish speaking. I was only in the southwest, and then I spent a little time up in Pontiac, Rochester. So I'm not super familiar with the entire mission. But I think when I was there were 4 stakes that cover that whole mission. There were 2 branches. Actually, there were 3 branches, I think. 4 branches, and they were all in the city of Detroit. One became a ward, and then one branch became disbanded. So I'm not really sure what it's like now. Those were in the city of Detroit, but everywhere else was like wards. So there's like a real distinction between suburbs and like the cities. I'm a sociology major right now, and so I've taken classes on like race and things like that. And if you look at a demographic of Detroit, it's like a perfect outline of the city of Detroit in terms of like black and white and like Hispanic and things like that. So it is really segregated. It's a completely different world, and there's a lot of like sociological reasons for that, which are very interesting, but I won't go into. But another interesting part about the mission is west of Detroit, there's a city called Dearborn, and I think it has the highest concentration of Muslim people outside of the Middle East. And so there's parts where it's probably like there's parts of that city where it's like 90-something% like Muslim, and we're just allowed to go out and knock doors and meet people, and everyone's just super nice. They'd like let us in. They'd feed us like raw lamb with like bird seed in it. I don't know what it was called. And like we even got Book of Mormons in Arabic and gave them to people, and they're like we believe in prophets and things like that. And so it was really cool. And I won't tell too many stories about that, just because I know things are kind of crazy. But I just know that they're really super, I don't know, Christ-like people, even though they don't believe in Christ in the same way Christians do. I was really, really impressed, and fell in love with them too. I think it even says Detroit in Doctrine and Covenants somewhere, where it's like, because it might be telling some missionaries to go there. And so there's some good church history, like in Pontiac. I think it might have started. I've heard stories of like Detroit has been closed to missionary work a couple of times. And even like rumors, there's so many missionary rumors of like getting the feet dusted or whatever on the city or whatever. Maybe one time was during the race riots. I can't remember, but so I know there is church history. I'm not too up on it. It felt like most people who we worked with in Detroit, the members, like our branch president was a convert of 9 years, and it was still very, very young. Though there were some members who had been members there for maybe around 20 years, but very few. There's a lot of that stuff, like people cohabiting, where you're like, hey, you have to either get married or separate before you can get baptized, and so that was tough. There were a couple of times where like we'd work with people who, who'd killed people maybe, and so we'd have to go get the first presidency. We'd have to go through the process of submitting paperwork to the first presidency and things like that, or like abortions and other things like that. And the Word of Wisdom is huge. Smoking, I know we did a lot of like flushing people's cigarettes down the toilet. We would like teaching like young people who just decided they'd want to give up alcohol. We'd go out and like they would just pour it out, and we shouldn't have done this either, but just like kind of throw the bottles, and just it was kind of like this ritual cleansing experience. They'd even come out on their bikes with us and like pour them out as they're riding around, and it was really weird. We probably shouldn't have done that, but it was a good relationship building experience. But yeah, Word of Wisdom, gangs probably. I think mostly it was just like transportation to church. That was a big thing. A lot of people don't have cars, and we only had so many members who could give rides. But also just like general lack of commitment. If they don't read or pray or come to church, like that was kind of like the biggest thing. But so I did notice that there was like this weird paradox, like in the suburbs where it was usually rich and maybe more white, hardly anyone would listen to us. So there was very low openness to like missionaries. But if they did, they were usually really committed. But in the inner city, where it was mostly like Black or Hispanic, Mexican, and more poor, there was anyone and everyone would listen to us. But there wasn't as much commitment. And so it's really interesting dynamic. I think you can be successful in both areas. One, it looks like a lot of success at the beginning, but then it just kind of weeds out to little. And in the other area, it starts out as like really hard, but if you find someone, it'll work. And so I just thought that was a very interesting kind of trend that I've noticed. The way the city's like laid out, it's like just kind of on the Detroit River. I can't remember. I think it was the French who were there first. It might have been the English, but the French, I think it was, they built like a spokes sort of street layout, and so there's like 5 big streets that like outshoot kind of like the spokes of a wagon wheel from like the downtown of Detroit. But then I think the English came in and kind of put a grid system on top of it. And so it's just kind of really weird streets, like because you have like these diagonal streets, but then you also have a grid. But in the winter when it snows, just talking about streets, the city doesn't well, when I was there at least, like the city didn't really plow the streets or anything, so it was just kind of crazy. Like I remember after one snowstorm, I think we pushed out like 15 cars out of the snow, like in like a day and a half or something. Just on, not like that's what we were trying to do, it was just on the way to appointments. We'd see people stuck in the snow like everywhere. But in like the Hispanic part of town, a lot of the Hispanics, like they work shoveling snow or cleaning snow, that's what they call it. And so they have like all the truck plows and like the bobcats. So sometimes like they would just be good neighbors and they'd come and they just plow their street, you know, and their driveway and maybe in a couple other neighbors' driveway, just like out of the goodness of their heart, which was cool. The main streets that we did notice that the main streets that lead to the casinos, those ones were salted and plowed because the casinos want people to come in from the suburbs to like I guess get business or whatever, and so they would pay for it privately, but the city didn't pay for any of that. So it made biking interesting too, and walking. We take buses sometimes too. They'd come pretty irregular intervals and sometimes not consistently. But yeah, it was good. Yeah, there's a couple casinos. Detroit is known as Motor City, you know, Henry Ford and things like that. So there's the big GM towers downtown. Ford has their headquarters in just west of Detroit in like Dearborn. And I know Pontiac like was in Pontiac, but they shut down, I think. So I'm not really too sure about but all that. But there are a lot of, I guess there were a lot of factories. But yeah, since the decline and things like that, like not as much. I know that there's a lot of hope and optimism in terms of rejuvenating it in terms of like high tech. There's a lot of like young entrepreneurs like moving to the downtown area. There's a lot of problems I see like sociologically with some of those things. The history of Detroit, I think Detroit had the first freeway, from what I've heard, and like there's a lot of like racism and things like that go back to that, where they built a freeway because white people, I'll just put it in very generalized terms, white people who worked downtown wanted to live in the suburbs, and so they wanted a faster way to get into town, but at the same time they wouldn't approve housing loans north of 8 Mile, and so like the black people were kind of forced to stay within the city, and then the white people were able to kind of leave the city and expand and things like that. And so that's one of the reasons why it's still so segregated the way it is today. And one of the things like that kind of frustrates me when I hear about Detroit and how things are getting better is you only hear about like the white people like coming and starting jobs in the downtown, and it just feels like maybe they're missing half of the city, you know, like maybe it's getting better in terms of economics for them, but I don't know if the quality of life is improving for the mass people that we worked with. Our favorite restaurant was Camino Real, which is in Southwest Detroit. It was right by our apartment, and it's just a restaurant that they built kind of on the side of their house, but they definitely had the best tacos. So go to Camino Real. A little advertisement for them. But they're really cool. But Mexican Town, like there's some restaurants, and they've kind of made it all nice to attract people from the suburbs to come visit. But it's kind of like Americanized Mexican food. It's not like the real deal stuff that you get more like in the parts that other people won't go to. I know there's a car show in downtown Detroit once a year, like in, I think, the Cobo Center, I think it's called. The Lions play down there, the Red Wings. I think the Pistons play outside in Ann Arbor. And the Tigers. We did go to a couple Tigers games on preparation days. You'll meet some like residual like Polish, like German, like European type of people who've like lived there for a long time. So you do get like these random like super old like white Polish people who are living in Detroit, and no one bothers them because they don't really bother anyone else. You know, you're relatively safe if you aren't like trying to like get into someone's drug turf or, you know, whatever. Missionaries especially, like, we felt pretty safe. The two things that were the most dangerous were teenagers and dogs. And like teenagers, I don't know, like maybe they're just trying to like prove themselves or something and be tough. But like the real hardcore gangsters, like, you're just like not even worth their time, you know. They don't need to like try to like pick fights with missionaries. And a lot of times they're really cool to missionaries. We worked with some of them and things like that. And when we got our bikes stolen, we called them up and said, hey, like, if you guys see our bikes around, can you let us know? And they're like, oh, we'll get them. And we're like, no, don't hurt anyone. We just want our bikes back. And so it was kind of fun. But yeah, so teenagers, just avoid them, but don't look afraid. One of the best things that I learned was if you see like a group of kids like walking down the street at you, don't cross the street, because that like shows that you're afraid. Approach them with pass along cards in your hand and try to convert them, because that will scare them. If you're more forward and things like that and say, hey, we're missionaries, like we want to share this message with you, they'll kind of just like totally be like, whoa, like withdrawn, and like they weren't expecting that. So that's something I learned, is just have confidence and walk with a quick pace. But in terms of dogs, we'd always have U-locks, which are good because they're like, if you have a little bike lock, they'll get busted and your bike will get stolen. But the U-locks are solid for that. But we'd also keep them around our handlebars. And so that way, if our dogs did come, we'd be able to pull off the U-locks and like defend ourselves. I only did that a couple times. But you can outrun them sometimes if they're small. We even did get pepper spray, and like it didn't really work too well. But yeah, dogs are probably like kind of one of the biggest threats. I don't want to like paint stereotypes, but I have heard of missionaries like getting held up and even like getting jumped and things like that. There was one story I've heard of missionaries who got jumped by a group of teens or whatever, and like they were just like kind of like on the street like trying to recover and stuff, and the teens were coming back for more, but they were downtown, and like homeless people actually came and like formed a ring around the missionaries to help protect them. And so it was just really cool. Yeah, we'd hear gunshots a lot. I remember, I think, calling on Mother's Day, talking to my aunt. I just like went out, like we had this like little porch, and I was just sitting out there with the door open or whatever, talking to her, and like there were gunshots going off. She's like, "Are those gunshots?" And I was just like, "Oh yeah," like it just kind of becomes normal. Like I remember a couple times like kneeling in companionship prayer, like during planning or like right at the end of the night, and we'd hear gunshots like right outside our door, like while we're praying, and so we'd just be kind of like, "And please bless them," you know, type of thing. Like, but there was a real transition in like my experience. Like I said before, that I was like kind of scared, like going out there. I don't know if you're not scared, there's something wrong with you. Like you should have a little bit of anxiety because it keeps you on your toes. But there was this real fear, and like the weekends were the worst because that's when like things would get the craziest. We hear the most gunshots. I remember riding home at night back to our apartment, and we'd hear gunshots over here, and so we'd say, okay, let's go this way. And then we'd hear gunshots over there, and then we'd say, okay, let's go this way. So we were kind of like doing a maze, like trying to avoid where we heard gunshots or whatever. But eventually, like I started to get kind of used to it, and things would start to happen, and I started to think like, you know, this is kind of like an adventure. Like, you know, we're like running from dogs, we're like seeing like groups of kids, and we're like trying to avoid them, you know, and like it just became kind of fun, I could say, where it was just kind of like the craziness of Detroit. And so I started to kind of like look forward to weekends, because I'd say, oh man, like what crazy thing's going to happen this weekend? You know, it would create a good mission story. That's what I was about. And like I'd like look for bullet shell casings on the street and things like that, and be like, this is so cool, like Detroit's so crazy and so rough and things like that, and kind of just like being like, man, I'm so tough because I'm here and I'm white, and you know, this is just crazy, but I'm okay, you know. But then it really switched for me because I think we were coming home, and we were riding home with actually some like illegal immigrants. They were giving us a ride back from the chapel, and we were at an intersection, and we saw a guy walking across the street, and a car just totally hit him and like ran over him and then just sped off. And we were like, what should we do? Like, maybe we should get out and help. But the people we were with were like, no, we can't get out. Like, they couldn't get involved with anything because they were trying to, like, you know, stay low from the cops too. So they just kept driving, and it was on a weekend. And so that's when I just started to realize, like, you know, this isn't fun. Like, every gunshot you hear, like, there's maybe someone on the other side of that. It's not an adventure. Like, it just became like really sad and started to weigh on me. And then that kind of transferred into anger. I just get mad at people for like being dumb. Like, I remember someone answering the door with like a bottle of beer in their hand. It was like probably like a 18, 19-year-old girl, and like you could tell she had like one or two kids like behind her in the house, and she was just like totally drunk. And I was just like so mad at her because I was like, can't you see what you're doing? Like, you're drunk, you have little kids, they're like looking up to you, you're not taking care of them. Like, I was just like, I was mad, but I like kind of held it in, and I was just like kind of did the normal missionary thing. But I just remember getting really mad, and even coming home from my mission, like being just so like angry at like the inequalities and like all the bad things that I saw and that were happening and things like that, and like wanting to fix it. And like, maybe that's why I studied sociology, is like, I want to change the world. I want to fix Detroit. But I think a lot of that anger is unhealthy. And I've started to transition it into love, and just realizing like that, like kind of letting go and like still wanting to make a difference and help. But saying like Detroit is in God's hands, and he'll take care of it, and I can help. But it's almost like when you see the bad, it's almost like a pity and a compassion. Like, but it's not fun. It's not like, there's no apathy, like, oh, it's hopeless. There's no anger, but it's just kind of love. I don't think any missionaries, I don't think they've been killed. I know they've, like I said before, I know they've been held up, gunpoint, like usually just give them your stuff or whatever. And I know they did, like, even some Spanish missionaries after I left, they got jumped, and one, like, I think got his jaw kind of shattered and had to have it wired shut, and maybe a couple broken ribs and things like that, because the people were trying to steal their bikes. And they were in a trio too at that time. So, but they closed down the area for a couple months. I can't remember how long, but yeah, it was a good experience. Like, sometimes, like, even the signage out on the streets for all the restaurants and places, they're all in Arabic. So sometimes you'd be like riding your bike down or whatever, your car, and you just feel like you're in the Middle East. And you're just like, wow, this is so cool. Like, and like, missionaries aren't allowed to go to the Middle East. And so you just feel like it's a very unique experience, serving in that area. So a lot of the people who like were super, super nice were from Lebanon. And they were just funny. Like, they would just joke with each other, and like, they'd speak enough English, and they would just, like, one person even, like, we came to their door, and he's like, I'm not interested in your Bible, but hold on a second. And he goes in, and he like brought us out a sandwich and a Capri Sun, and he's like, but here you guys go. And like, he's like, may God be with you, or whatever. And so it was just super, super kind. And like, yeah, they were just really open. And sometimes it was funny, like, the women, like, they're supposed to wear that, I think, hijab, what's it called? The head piece or whatever. And they'd just like come to the door and answer without it on. And then they'd see us, and then they'd have this realization, like, oh, oops. And so they'd just like run in and grab it and put it on. And, and we weren't supposed to like shake their hands, but like missionaries, like, sometimes we'd forget, and we'd just be like, all right, it was good to meet you. And like, we'd go to shake like a woman's hand or whatever, and they'd just be like, and we were like, oh, okay. And so it'd be kind of like really awkward, but we'd laugh about it. And like, it was just funny, like, just like mixing like the two cultures. because they'd be like in America, but also like trying to like maintain their beliefs and things like that. Another one was like we'd go and get chicken shawarmas from this like Arabic restaurant, and like everyone would be like talking, and everyone's talking in Arabic, and we'd walk in with our white shirts and ties, like two white guys, and then like once we walked in, the whole place would just get really quiet. And like then we just go sit down, and then everyone would just slowly start to talk again. So we always thought that that was funny. There was kind of a funny experience, like working with like a Muslim person. Like we talked to him on the porch, and he was telling us about the Quran and basically trying to convert us, and we were trying to convert him and things like that. And he was like, "Oh yeah, like we like Islam means like submission or whatever, peace," and like he was just kind of saying stuff. And then eventually he like let us into his house or whatever, and his wife was there, and he was telling us earlier like something similar that Muhammad said about like how like don't even hurt bugs. Like I think Joseph Smith said like if you knew what I knew, you wouldn't hurt a fly, and I think Muhammad might have said something similar to that. But we're in the house like talking to him, and he's like sitting on the couch looking at us, and like a spider like crawls out from under the rug. And his wife's like, "Spider!" And he just like, without even looking, he just like stomps it. And then he just keeps talking. And it was just so funny. Like, I just like realized like how human like they are. Like, I mean, we have ideals. Like Joseph Smith said, if you knew what I knew, don't hurt a fly. But like my wife and I, like, we try to catch spiders, but sometimes like we justify because we're like, oh, well, they're trying to hurt us. So it's self-defense. And so we'll kill spiders and bugs and things like that. So it just makes me realize like how much like us they are. And, you know, yeah, weaknesses, like they have an ideal of, you know, treat everything nicely, but sometimes you just got to kill the spider. If your wife says, you know, deer one, I think it's probably there's certain pockets that were very high percentage of Muslims, but I don't know the statistics. Someone could Google it, but I'd say it's mostly Muslim. Yeah, we met people from Lebanon, from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Jordan, Pakistan. There was actually a member, I think, who was from Pakistan. We had a cool experience with a guy from Egypt, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he like let us in, and he was like giving us this red juice, and he was saying like this is only found in this like certain place in Egypt or whatever, and he gives us this juice and we're drinking it, and I'm like, this tastes like Jamaica, which is like a Mexican flower tea that the Mexicans would give us. And so like I was like making connections. I don't know if they're true or not, but I was like, you know, maybe in the Book of Mormon when they brought seeds from the other part of the world, like maybe they brought Jamaica, you know, and so they think they have a rare thing, but it's really actually what Mexicans use all the time. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it tasted like Jamaica. If your clothing can be like sort of like layers, that helps. So then you can shed them and increase them instead of just like having one huge coat, because then you're like always just like either sweating or freezing going in between. Don't get steel toe boots because the steel gets really cold, and then when you go into a warm house, like the cold steel like stays. And so your feet just never warm up. And they're just heavy and things like that. Thermals. I never tried the thermal garments, but I wore so much clothing. Like I'd wear thermals, like wind pants, and then my church pants, and then I'd like have two pairs of socks on, and then on the top I'd wear like thermals, sometimes another shirt, and then my missionary shirt, and then sometimes a sweater, and then like a 2-layer jacket, and then I'd have small gloves and then big gloves, and then like a scarf and like a beanie, and then sometimes like even a hood. Like I was just bundled up, which is good because if you crash on your bike, like you just like, you know, it doesn't hurt at all, but you kind of like, I don't know, you just kind of wobble around everywhere, and it's good in the winter too because you look like really intimidating. So no one wants to mess with you, especially if you wear a lot of clothes because you look huge. There's like a weird paradox too in terms of your bike, the amount of lighting you want. The missionary handbook says like you should have like a lot of lights so people can see you, but there's sometimes that you don't want to be seen in Detroit. you kind of want to just like glide by and like not have anyone know you're there, just kind of for safety reasons. And so that's something to consider. Now that maybe like reflective gear, I don't know, things like that. But those are some practical tips that I can think of. I don't know. The Spanish branch is really what I'm most familiar with. It was actually half English, half Spanish. And so I think they might have switched it now, but when we were there, we had translators, and we had combined everything. And so for sacrament meeting, the missionaries would sit in the Relief Society room with it broadcasted over the intercom. And so we'd listen to it, and then we'd provide live translation. And so all the members would have headsets. And so if someone was speaking in English, the Spanish people would put their headsets on. And then if someone was speaking in Spanish, they'd take them off. And then the English people would put their headsets on. But sometimes we didn't have enough, so they'd have to like switch. And the best was when they would ask for people to, like a sustaining vote in church, because the translation was delayed. When they'd say like all in favor, and then like half the church would raise their hands, and then he would say like all opposed, but then the translation would come through all in favor, and so half the branch would be like that. So it was just really funny. And then there were just some funny, like sometimes when people would like give testimonies, they would be talking about really weird things, and we'd have investigators there who we didn't want them to hear their testimonies. And so we would just like teach the plan of salvation over the translation system. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but we felt good about it in the moment. So it was just the Spanish branch is really unique, and I think it's separated now. But the love between the Spanish people and the English-speaking people, whether mostly African American but also white, is just amazing. There's really no distinction in the church there in terms of race. So Spanish-speaking missionaries, there's very few of them in Detroit, and so you really develop a super close relationship with your companions, the other Spanish missionaries. I was my MTC companion. I was his companion 5 different times through different like areas and times in the mission. And the other Spanish missionaries, I was multiple times, sometimes in trios and things like that, which was really cool. And you also you're part of the Spanish branch. Like I said, I was there for almost 20 months, where you're there for so long that you kind of forget that you're a missionary. You kind of just become one of the branch, like one of the members, and you know everything about everyone's life, like all their kids' names, like everyone in the branch's names, like even like birthdays, and you just become family. I think it's very, very unique and different, which makes leaving so much harder. There's only one Spanish English branch. Everywhere else is I think just English. There's 6 out of, when I was there, I think we were under 100. But with the age change, there's probably a ton more. But we were at around 200, and then they just started decreasing. But it was cool because even though we were losing missionaries, we were still increasing in productivity. And so our mission presidents were awesome. They really just helped us to live the gospel and be obedient and remember that it's the Lord's work. And so you don't need a lot of missionaries to have a lot of baptisms. There's prepared people, and you'll be led to them, and they'll be led to you. So in terms of Spanish speaking, other things, something good to be aware of is because it is kind of mixed. A trend that we noticed is that usually Hispanic people would keep their houses much nicer. They'd maybe do the bricks and things like that, maybe because they have more of those construction skills or whatever. So that was helpful, going to doors, what to expect. You could kind of predict who you're going to talk to, because it's also confusing because there's people from the Caribbean, like Cuba or the Dominican Republic there, and they're black. And so I remember the first time we were I think we met someone on the street, and he was black, and I just started speaking to him in English, and then he just goes off in Spanish, and I was just how does this black guy know Spanish so well? And it's a weird Spanish too, because Dominican is they don't close their mouths. They just talk really fast and funny, compared to Mexicans that are slow and very accented. things like that. So like sometimes if a black person answers the door, like you don't know, you just kind of have to throw out English or throw out Spanish, and sometimes even Arabic people look like Spanish people too, and it's always funny like when you like meet an Arabic person and like you realize they don't speak English, then you know they're Arabic, but you just like divert to Spanish because you're just kind of like trained like, oh, if they don't speak English, they must speak Spanish. So then you start speaking Spanish to them, and then they're like really confused, and then so yeah. But I did learn. This goes back to the Arabic comment. I just wanted to brag a little. I learned how to have like I had a whole conversation with the cashier at Walmart in Dearborn who was Arabic. So I was like, I said like I can't even remember. Hajime or something like Masalama and Salam alaikum, and like I said like all these like Arabic things, and I was like, hi, how are you, and like have a good day and good to meet you and goodbye. I said like all those things in Arabic, but I was able to like recognize what she was saying. So I had this whole conversation to where she thought I spoke Arabic, but I didn't. I just knew like I had a pattern. That was cool. Favorite foods out there, my top 3 favorite were pupusas, which are from El Salvador, which are like, I don't know how to explain them. They're like corn meal, like not cornmeal, masa, corn flour, and like inside like this little pancake is you can either put like chicharron or pork rinds, I think, beans or cheese or whatever, and then you put cabbage and tomato sauce on them, and they call them pupusas. They're out here in Provo too. That was one of my favorites, and then arroz con gandules. It's a Puerto Rican food. It's just rice with chickpeas, but then they season it all special and stuff. And that was super good. We had Puerto Rican members who'd feed us all the time. And then tacos de chorizo with like Mexican sausage. Like I love those too. So those are like my 3 favorite foods. A lot of the Spanish people are very like family oriented, and I don't know, maybe that comes from the Catholic backgrounds and maybe just Mexico in general, because a lot of them were kind of recently in the United States and things like that. Very hard workers, and just they know how to have fun, and I don't know, like maybe you're supposed to stay more formal and strict, but we did learn a lot of like Mexican slang, and like the members loved it, like to an extent, like loved it when we would try to like sound like chilangos or like people from like DFA, like the kind of more like gangster street talk. We'd like be all formal and stuff, but then we just throw in words like that and just like really like just make them laugh, and we just developed really good friendships with them, and we could be light and funny and like friendly, but then we also knew how to like have really deep personal conversations with them too. And I think everyone can engage at both of those levels. You just have to not, because there's the risk of being friends and just never getting into like the doctrine, or just being too stingy that like people can't feel like you're real. Each of like the Central American countries like have like code names like catrachos, guanacos, chapines, and things like that. Like people think it's funny like if you can refer to them by their like cultural nickname, and just like really like kind of understanding them and things like that. It's really important. I'm probably going to get this wrong. Catrachos might be Honduras. Guanacos could be El Salvador, and then chapines maybe Guatemala. Ticos I think are Costa Rica. Boricuas are Puerto Rico. Also Puerto Ricans, they say jugo de chino is like Chinese juice, but it means orange juice instead of jugo de naranja. That's the difference. And then like there's just different words for like tamale and cake and things like that. I can't remember them all exactly. It's been a while, but you'll learn it all. You'll be fine. Here's one other tip. Like Detroit lingo is like black people. Like Detroit is famous for saying like "what up, doe." Like I think there's a whole song that literally just goes like "what up, doe, what up, doe," and someone had it as their ringtone once. And like whenever it came on, like everyone would just start dancing like in the middle of our lesson, which was funny. But also like if you like go to offer them a pass along card and they say like "now I'm straight," straight means like like I'm okay, like no thank you. They're not like talking about like their sexual orientation. That kind of confused me. They said, no, I'm straight. And so they use the word straight a lot. Like dipstat, like means like I'm gonna leave. Like I'm fit into dipstat is like I'm about ready to leave or something like that. They say like there's a distinction between like the New York minute and the Detroit minute. Like the New York minute implies like it's super fast or whatever, but in Detroit, like a minute means like it can mean anywhere up to like 2 years. It's like 5 minutes to 2 years. Like I remember talking to someone, or like he was like telling us like, oh yeah, I haven't worked in a minute. Or like, oh yeah, like how long has it been since you had a job? He's like, it's been about 2 years. And so they just like use a minute, or like, hey, well, yeah, we'll be there in a minute. And then we're like sitting there waiting for like an hour. And so minute can just mean anything. They'll sometimes say like, I'm in a mess. And like that's bad. But then if you say like, I'm in a hot mess, it's like worse. Same with minute. Like if they say like, I'll be there in a hot minute, it means like they'll be there probably actually around a minute to 5 minutes. So those are things you learn. Narc means to tattletale. So if someone like says don't narc, to blaze someone is to like blaze or fry is to like kind of blow up on them like emotionally. I think it's just really important not to judge people. As a missionary and someone who maybe comes from like Utah or Arizona or somewhere like I did, like a very safe place, like white, middle class, like you're working with a population that is very different, like demographically than you, and who are struggling and things like that. And don't think like you're better than them, or you're more loved or more blessed or anything like that. They have the most faith and good intent and things like that. I remember one experience where like there were a lot of prostitutes on Michigan Avenue, and we'd see them all the time. We knew who they were, and like we even talked to them sometimes. And I used to think like, man, like how could they do this? Like they're selling their bodies, they're like just disobeying God's commandments, and all these things like that. Thinking like they were like sex addicts and like they just like had no virtue, things like that. But then one day, like it was super cold outside, and we were riding our bikes home at night, and there was a prostitute just like in a tiny little skirt, just standing leaning against like this telephone pole, just like freezing, and just like wanting maybe someone to pick her up or whatever. And it just like hit me like that she wasn't doing it for fun. Like she was doing it like because out of like survival, she needed money. Like maybe there was a drug addiction. I don't know what it was, but it was just like, it just like kind of like really hit me hard. And I was just like, oh man, like people out here are good. They're trying. And like the prostitutes, like they'd talk to us like all the time and like say how hard it was and how scared they were to like get in a car with a stranger. And some of them would get killed, and it was just like, I don't know, like the people who you'd think are the worst, like are still like God's children, and they have so much potential and good things. And there's like other stories I could tell too, but yeah, don't judge people. I'd say one of the hardest things was just like a health issue. And maybe it's not particular to Detroit, but I developed like headaches when I read, and they used to be really, really bad, to where like I couldn't even like write in my planner, like have to studies in the morning, even like pay attention and focus in lessons. I just kind of have to sit there like really still and just kind of stare into one general direction because they were just so bad. And then eventually, like through God's grace, like we found a member who was a chiropractor, and he started to work on me, and it helped out, got about 50% better. But I remember the times when it was really, really bad, I was just kind of thinking, and like before that, like I went to neurologist, like I went to all these doctors, talked to the mission doctor, tried this medicine where I learned how to swallow pills. And like there was nothing wrong, and like they couldn't figure anything out. And so I kind of just felt like I was going to be doomed to that life. And I kind of just like was really mad and like frustrated, but then I kind of just accepted it. Was like, okay, like probably gonna have to have a caretaker. I was thinking all these things like not going to be able to drive anywhere, not going to be able to work, you know. And I was just kind of like, I thought that that was my future, and I was just like, okay, like whatever, like I'll accept it, Lord, whatever you want, you know. But things did get better, and I still have the problems. Like I go through the accessibility center at the university, and have to get all my textbooks and audio, and I use text to speech software to read, so it's like robot reading, and I can go really fast, which everyone thinks I'm crazy. But then I also do speech to text to write, and so yeah, but that was probably the hardest thing. Like they were even thinking about sending me home because they couldn't find out what was wrong. But yeah, it did get better, but it was hard. It was good. Menudo is cow stomach. When I was early on in my mission, I thought it just meant often, and so they offered it to us, and I thought they were saying, "Oh yeah, we eat this often," and so I was like, "Okay, like I'll have some." And then my companion, he knew what it was, and so he's like, "No, thank you." And then they said, "Oh well, we also went to McDonald's," so like he got like a hamburger, and I was having to eat like menudo, which is like super. It's like doesn't taste bad. It's just like eating a rubber band ball. It's just like you can't chew it, and it's just really weird. So menudo means often, and it means cow stomach. This wasn't me. It was I think one of my companions. He like this Hispanic lady was telling us like that she had like 8 kids or whatever, and my companion was like trying to say like, how did you do it, you know? But like the word for to do and to make in Spanish are the same. And so he said like, how did you make them? Or how did you make, you know? And so she was just like, what? And I was just busting up laughing. So that one was pretty good. Probably like either the cow stomach or I had pig feet too. Probably just like the snowstorms, like 0 degrees, like or lower than 0, with like really windy and things like that. We'd have days where they said don't be out for more than 15 minutes, and so if we were tracting, we'd tract for a little, then we'd be like frozen because it's high humidity cold, and so like it doesn't matter how much you wear, like you're just still frozen. And I've got like 2% body fat, and so like I just freeze. And so we'd go into the stores and pretend like we were looking at something, but we were just trying to get warm, and then we'd go out and track some more. So it's good here's a good tip: work really hard at finding as it starts to get colder, so that we have a lot of people to teach in the winter, because tracking in the winter, it stinks. And also like if it rains a lot, like sometimes like it just floods, and you just have to bike through like just like foot of water sometimes, lift your legs up and get speed, you know, things like that. I learned how to swallow pills on my mission, because like I like was having headache problems, and like I got prescribed like these pills, and like so I like had to force myself to learn how to do it. So that's really dumb. But other skills, like I learned a lot about bikes. Like I mean I had a bike like growing up, and I rode it sometimes, but your bikes just like get trashed, like because all the salt on the roads. They just like rust things out, and so your brake lines break, you get flats. There's 2 tips about bikes. One is to wrap them in duct tape or electrical tape or something, so that way they don't look new and nice, because that will decrease the chance of them getting stolen. 3 tips: get fenders, because the rain or snow, that's going to kick up all over you. And you can make them out of plastic bottles if you need to. We are always experimenting. And this is the last one is so good. I wish we would have known this before. But like double tube your tires. So like if you ever get a flat, use the and you have to replace the tube, get a new tube, and then cut up the old one, and then wrap the old tube around the new tube and put it in, because it creates like a double layer, and you'll get so many less flats, and it's like super cheap to do. Because the worst thing is like when you're really far from home and it's late at night and you get a flat tire and you have to walk your bike home, and it's Detroit, and biking is way better. Walking is like kind of scary late at night. One time on the way home from church, we were actually in a car with some other missionaries, and we saw like 3 guys like approaching this prostitute, and like one of them had like this huge 2x4, and so that's what caught our attention. And they just like actually kind of like started like beating her up, and like taking her purse. And so the missionary who was driving, he like stopped the car and like started honking. But then like a car next to us, like a bunch of guys got out of the car and like we're all holding their belts. And so we were like, oh no, what do we do? So we just like, we kind of drove off, but called the cops, and the cops said, oh, we'll send a request. And then like, I don't think anyone came, and like eventually the other elders went back and talked to the lady, and it looked like they just were probably stealing drugs out of her purse or something like that. Like they were probably like the pimps and she was the prostitute, things like that. The other missionaries, like there's too many crazy stories probably, but in front of their house, like there was a drive-by there was a drug dealer's house across from the street from them, and the guy got shot, and so he was just, I don't know, there's just too many stories. Like he was just out there with his like AK, like on the phone, like screaming, and like there's just like all sorts of crazy stuff. I would tell people that it's the most, like everyone thinks it's like the most violent like place in America, but like they really are like some of the friendliest people you'll ever meet, which is super ironic, but they're good people. I think humility, following the Spirit, and love, those things. I think really just like humility. Like towards the end of my mission, I think when I had like 2 transfers left, I had gone through my whole mission of like this cycle of, like you get to a new area or whatever, and you just work really hard, and then like nothing ends up working out because you're just relying upon yourself and your own strength, and then you get humbled, and then you start to see success, and then you're like, oh, okay, but then it just like you repeat that cycle all the time. But I finally understood that towards the end of my mission, and so I remember like I was like, okay, 2 transfers left, I'm just going to give it everything I've got, and I just was like, just prayed so hard for humility and just like trying to understand the Spirit and what He would have us do. And I remember like days literally feeling dragged, where like something would fall through, and I would just like feel like, okay, this way, and then we'd go and find someone, because like towards the beginning of our mission, like we'd call them like trackathons. We tracked for like maybe 4 hours straight and find like maybe 3 or 4 potentials, and they'd come maybe 1 or 2 new investigators or whatever, and like we'd get like maybe 3 to 5 investigators in a week or whatever. But I remember like towards the end of my mission, like there was 1 week where I think we knocked on 1 door that whole week, but we found 20 new investigators that week, and it was just like everywhere we went, like people were just like popping up and like needing the gospel, and like it was just crazy. Like, so I truly believe in the power of humility. I remember this one time we were teaching the first lesson, and like the missionary's objective in the first lesson is to like end it with a commitment for baptism or whatever. And then I was on an exchange with a different missionary, and we were just going through like the whole, that God calls prophets, and there's Christ had a church, and then there was like an apostasy, and we led up to the start of the restoration. But the elder that I was with, he prefaced it, and we were teaching to probably like 20-something-year-old girls or whatever, and I think their boyfriend was like in the kitchen, like because he didn't want to listen, but they were interested. I think they were sisters, and he prefaced it by saying, what we're going to tell you next is the most important thing that's happened since the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the Spirit was just like really strong, and he was going to go into the Joseph Smith story. And one of them just like interrupted us and said, we haven't been baptized, and it was just like, we were like, oh, we're going to get to that, but it was just kind of like in Acts where it says like the Spirit pricked people's hearts. It's just like, if you invited the Spirit, people like, they want to be baptized, they want to repent, and they want to follow Christ. It's probably been said before, but just the whole idea of when you come up for your mission, like everyone will say like, have you adjusted? And just this idea, I think I've heard it expressed before, just like, you don't adjust to them, they should adjust to you. Because if you're on a spiritual high, like maintain that, keep it going. Like people Elder Holland talked about how missionaries would tell him, like, say like, oh, when I get back to real life, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And Elder Holland says, like, no, this is the most real thing that you'll do your entire life. Like, it's just having that gospel and the eternal perspective. So there's a quote, I don't know who it was from, but it said something to the fact that you don't rise in your entire life above the stature that you carve out in the mission field. And I mean, I know repentance is real and things like that. But for me, that just helped me to give my all on my mission, and I have no regrets, and that is the best feeling ever. Like, just to work your hardest that you've ever worked, and people before you have given their all, so don't ruin it. Just have faith, trust in the Lord, and recognize that the calling is from Him, and when the Lord calls, He qualifies. He'll protect you. Follow the Spirit. Be humble. Learn to love the members. Just be nice to companions. I don't know. I had awesome companions. Yeah, my mission has meant everything to me. I just remember coming home from my mission, going out to the movies with my friends, trying to be normal and social again, and just like getting past the fact that how could I be like enjoying myself when there's people out there suffering and dying in Detroit, so like both it's helped me like in terms of like what I'm studying in school, like everything I want to do in my life, make a difference in the world, but just the foundation it gave me in terms of missionary work and the fire. I remember coming home from my mission, and like I would see a Mexican person on the side of the road, and I'd pull over and talk to them. I was just like out of control. Like I just could not like wait to share the gospel with everyone I saw. The mission, if you give your all, like it'll change you. So yeah, that's all I can say is just give your all.